Hello, and welcome back to Catching Up to Fi. I'm Bill Yount with my co-host Becky Heptig, and we have a special episode for you today. This is, well, not necessarily live, but this was recorded live on a cruise that Becky went on to Alaska. Becky, tell us about this episode.
Well, we're talking to Roger Whitney, who does the Retirement Answer Man podcast, and he also has a subscription club called the Rock Retirement Club. And so about 45 people from the Rock Retirement Club went on a cruise together to Alaska. It was so much fun. It was definitely a bucket list item for me. And while we were on the cruise ship, Mark Trautman, who was also in the group, Mark and I had a chance to sit down with Roger and chat with him about money in preparation for retirement and some of his thoughts about that. So I hope that you enjoy the episode. It may have a little background noise. We had a live audience while we were recording this, and it was so much fun. So sit back and relax and enjoy Roger Whitney.
If you're late to FI, or financial independence, or retirement planning, or whatever you want to call it, you're normal. I will have my time in retirement was the way that she framed it, and always sacrificing her life for that brochure and being in that brochure. I remember the inflection point with marriage was as soon as I decided and worked through, I'm going to be happy with Shauna in my life. It's not Shauna that's going to make me happy. That's when I actually became a real man.
And one of the things I learned early on when we learned how to sail is you cannot steer a boat that's not moving. If it's still, you can turn the wheel, but you're not going to change anything.
I think it's Nietzsche said, it's like a snake will die if they don't shed their skin. So part of this process is becoming a new version of yourself.
Hi, and welcome to Catching Up to Fi, a podcast on mindset, money, life on the journey to financial independence. I'm Bill, and I'm a late starter.
I'm Becky, and I'm also a late starter, and we're your hosts. We're here to help you with your journey to financial independence, no matter where you're starting from.
We're going to talk to other late starters, experts, and we'll explore topics related to our mission.
Join us as we catch up to Fi together.
Hi, and welcome back to Catching Up to Fi. I'm your host, Becky Heptig, and I'm here with my good friend, Mark Trautman. Mark is standing in for Bill today as a guest host, and I'm so happy he's here to help me bring you another episode of Catching Up to Fi. Mark was featured on episode 12, Fast Times and Caddyshack, where Bill and I talked to him about money in relationships. How you doing, Mark?
I'm doing awesome. It's so cool to be here. We're sitting up on pretty much above the bridge, I think, of the ship, looking straight out ahead. And we're just cruising out of Skagway right now on our way to, well, we're going to bypass Juneau and go to, well, now the map changed. So Sitka is our next destination. So tomorrow we'll be there.
So Mark and I and about 40 of our friends from the Rock Retirement Club are on this Alaskan cruise, and we wanted to bring you some fun from the ship this week. So we're recording from the library of the ship with a live audience. We're going to talk today to Roger Whitney from the Retirement Answer Man show, and we hope to bring you a few stories from the others here on the cruise with us. So grab an Alaskan ale, curl up with your favorite sled dog, and listen in as we bring you adventures from Alaska. So Roger Whitney is the host of one of the top retirement podcasts, the Retirement Answer Man. He's also the author of Rock Retirement, a simple guide to help you take control and be more optimistic about the future. Roger has more than 25 years of experience walking through the journey into retirement with clients and listeners. The Retirement Answer Man show was born out of years of experience, a deep need to help people, and creative restlessness. Every episode takes difficult or boring financial conversations, concepts, and strategies and makes them more approachable and occasionally more humorous. Stephen and I have listened to Roger's podcast for a few years and have learned so much about rocking our retirement. Roger has helped us create a great life in retirement, financially, with family and friends, and with our hobbies. Roger Whitney, welcome to Catching Up to Fi.
Did you just say my show is boring? Is that what I heard in the introduction?
And I read that and I said, I'm not sure about that. She said, I got it from him. It was on his website. So.
I'm going to have to talk to my people, whoever wrote that.
Someone wrote that. I'm not going to say who.
Probably Nicole tweaking me. It's great to be here.
Well, thanks for joining us, Roger. I want to talk just a little bit about earlier in your life and kind of work our way up to here. I've heard you talk about your mom. Can you tell us how she shaped the passions that you have now?
Oh, with my mom, so we were raised as a single mother. She remarried when I was going into high school, and myself and my two sisters, and she went to law school at age 40. I can remember her riding the train in from Ann Arbor into Detroit to go to Wayne State University while I was in middle school, I guess it was. Once she graduated law school, she worked with her second husband in a real estate business. And she and I would have these active discussions about living for today versus doing something and sacrificing for tomorrow. And of course, I was young and I was all YOLO, so I'm like, you have to live for today. And she worked so hard. She was working full time when she went to law school. We were very much latchkey because she grew up in an era where she had to take care of, 3 kids. And so we'd have these active discussions about this. And she was always about, I will have my time in retirement, was the way that she framed it. And always sacrificing her life for that brochure and being in that brochure. And then right when I graduated college in 1990, she passed away from cancer. So she never actually got to that brochure. And over time, that's influenced the perspective I take and how I think about it for myself, but for people that I chat with, of tomorrow isn't promised for everyone. And it's very easy to delay life and sacrifice, sometimes unnecessarily. Mm-hmm. So that's how I've come to a little bit more balanced perspective on it.
You have a quote that I want to share. You say, I love what happens when people shift their mindset from investing in a portfolio to investing in what they love. So tell us about that.
Well, some of that has to do with, I call myself a classically trained financial planner. And I used to teach the retirement segment of the CUtFI program for certificate holders. And if you look at how financial planning, or retirement planning in this case, is framed, it's all a math problem. And that's one reason from a profession, it's easier when it's a math problem, right? If you stay within the borders of the spreadsheet. And with people living longer, most not having a pension, not just living longer, being more active and having more expenses, the math doesn't work for almost all of us, except for people that are well overfunded. And so what ends up happening in financial planning is all the decisions are, hey, you need to work longer, you need to save more money, you need to take more investment risk, you need to settle for less later on, or some combination of all those things to make the numbers work. And all those options sort of suck. Right? That's sacrificing your life right now. And there are other things that you can invest in that can help you not scale a mountain to reach the top, but actually enjoy the entire journey along the way. And I think a lot of us, especially our generation, baby boomers and a little bit younger, don't think in those terms because those options weren't there for us. You can create a great life and still work. You can create a great life where you have more time freedom. And those are the areas I think we have the most agency, especially if we're trying to catch up.
I think that's a conversation that's happening more and more lately. Sort of in the beginning of the FI movement, it was all about sacrifice now. Let's skinny down to beans and rice and don't go anywhere, and so that we can get to the goalpost sooner. I think there's a lot of people now that are saying that's not exactly the way I want to play this game.
Yeah, that was the original criticism of FIRE was, retire early. What are you going to do if you retire at 40? Right. And, right. And you're sacrificing so much early on that you're still playing the game like my mom did, but just in a much more accelerated way to try to get to the brochure a little bit early. And then what actually happens, and I think this is probably where FI and FIRE especially is starting to evolve is it's the FI part of it, the financial independence, which gives you options. Because everybody that is in FIRE, generally they're working doing something. The only difference is it's just doing it on their own terms. And a lot of this, I think, is just having agency to have control, right? Over how much I work, where I work, having the freedom to go on a cruise and not have to submit a vacation request or be on the corporate treadmill of reporting and promotions. That's usually what people want to get away from. So I think FIRE has moved much more to FI, and I think that's really healthy because that's a great thing to strive for.
So tell me about how you got to where you are now. You have a podcast, you've written a book, and then there's other aspects to your life also. So tell us kind of what's going on with you and what are all the different pies that you have your fingers in?
Oh, geez. Did you know the book Second Mountain?
I've heard you talk about it, but I have not read it.
David Brooks, I think, is the author. Is that right? He frames it as the first mountain is, the book came out maybe a few years ago, so this is the journey I've been on, not knowing the framing that he put into it is the first mountain is that financial and career success, mainly career success, material success, take care of your family, have your house, etc. And the second mountain is you get to that peak at whatever level you get to, and it's like climbing, a mountain, and it's sort of a false peak. You think that's what it's all about, and then you get there, and then you have this, is this it kind of moment? This is what I was sacrificing so much of my life for? And then he would argue, and I think this relates to my journey, is then the second mountain is the real mountain is the one of purpose and connection and community. And that's the humanity part, right? That's the mountain that ultimately we're getting to once we take care of, the financial needs at whatever level we're trying to. And so that's really the journey I've been on. I started the podcast really for myself because I think out loud, and I was just trying to think through questions that I'm dealing with in an organized way. And it morphed into something I had never imagined, and it caused me to restructure my entire business and extract myself from a business partnership and go on my own and work with clients remotely, and then not want to build a huge firm, which was always what I thought I was supposed to want and was trying to do. Through the podcast, started the club, which created friends all over the world. And we're sitting here with 40, 50 people, and you're walking around and you know all these people at some level, and you at least have the same spirit and purpose and relatively similar goals. That's special. And so I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just trying to figure it out and lean into it and be a good steward of it.
So let's move into maybe some specific questions about money. Our community is a community of folks who are starting later than probably what we would have liked to have done that. So can you tell us anything that you've seen from your practice about folks who are starting late? Do you have any experience with people on that path?
Can I ask a question related to that?
Mm-hmm.
So if you're starting late, and you guys started late.
We did.
Right?
We did.
I know your
Very
story.
Late.
In your mind, what is it you were trying to solve for? What was it? What was the mountain that you were focused on when you're just like, wait a second, I got to clean this up?
The very first thing that we focused on was stability and safety, because I've heard stories where some people are like, they hit 50 years old and then they're like, oh, I haven't been thinking about this. I guess I better think about it. We had life smack us in the face. And because we had no safety net, no emergency fund, no savings of any kind, no college savings, nothing. And there was a period of time when we didn't even have income. Life got really hard. And the first step in that was just stability, so that we felt like I felt like we were digging a bigger hole every day, and I couldn't see how we were going to get out of it.
So how did you not put your head in the sand?
For a while we did. But you reach a point where you're like, if I keep doing what I'm doing, I'm going to keep getting what I've been getting. It was pain. I mean, it was just basically pain drove us to the point where we are like, something has to change. we can't keep going the way we are now. But the problem is we didn't know what to do at first. We didn't know how to fix it.
And I think everybody's going to have their own story as to how to fix it, right? You can talk about, from a money perspective. Yes, you can cut down on spending, right? You can, Paula Pant, one of my friends, always says, there's only so much frugaling you can do, though, right? You can do a lot, but there's only so much. The real power is building the chainsaw or the power shovel to help earn your way out of it is much better. But I think if you're late, the key thing, and I think this is the key thing for everybody, really is, what can I do next? Right? The first step is just acknowledge, right? Observe, this is where I'm at. That's the first step. And that's, like most things, that's the hardest step, right? Just acknowledging where you're at. And then step 2 is going through the process of grief and forgiveness, which this all sounds touchy-feely, but this is really about money, because you can tell once you acknowledge that and really see it, and I'm guessing you guys have, I know I've done this in my life financially, because it's not like I haven't made a lot of, I don't have a lot of regrets there. It frames stories you tell yourself about yourself. I am not this, or I am, and that can define your entire life. So there's this whole process of, I'm 50X, this is where I'm at, how the heck do I get out of this? And then once you acknowledge that, then it's like, I'm horrible. I'm terrible. I can't do this. Just all that regret. So you have to go through that grieving process at some point, and then you have to get into, Scott Sanborn on our team would call it a OODA loop, because he's from the military. You observe, okay, this is where I'm at. You orient to get an idea of what could I do. You brainstorm, what little incremental thing could I do? Maybe it's frugaling on the first. Maybe it's slowing your lifestyle down. Maybe it's, my wife would say I have a book addiction. Maybe it's not going Amazon Prime. So you build friction towards the things you're trying to control. Like for me, it's Amazon and books. And then you make easy the things you're trying to do, like cooking at home, say. What can I do next? Make a decision, do it. And that's action, right? So that's the OODA. And then in military terms, the goal is you're trying to go through that loop as quickly as possible. Observe, orient, decide, act. Observe, orient, decide, act. That's how you have to do it. But it's going to be these little baby things, because first stop digging. And that's for me, getting off Prime and buying books, and then orient and decide and then act. But it's going to be lots of little baby steps. I think that's the way you have to go about it, because otherwise you're going to look at yourself in whatever hole you're in. And I have been in a big financial hole too in my 30s and dug myself out in my 40s. That's the first thing.
I don't think I knew that. I've listened to you for a long time, and I don't think I knew that.
So for me, I was in my 20s and I made a little bit. I didn't have any role models financially. So I didn't have any good financial foundation. I know, like Mark's daughter does. She's going to be a rock star. Hopefully my kids too.
They're hanging out together on this trip, so maybe they'll all come together.
Yeah,
figure it out.
Yeah, my kids, they're going to be so much better off than we are. Thank goodness, from a financial perspective, anyway. Yeah, so in my 20s, my wife. That's my ego period. I made a decent amount of money in my 20s and did my spreadsheets, and it can only go up. Your income only goes up, right? And so you live into the future, and we had her starter house, bought a custom house, all me driving this, had my BMW, and my wife hates BMWs to this day. Because we'll never own another one, because that represents me in that period to her. And then so all through my 20s, just lived the lifestyle. And in my 30s, when our kids came, I went through some business transitions, and starting our business, I guess it was in 2003, and my income went down by 80% as I was navigating all of that. But I had built this lifestyle that I had to support, and I went into a pretty decent amount of debt in my 30s, betting on myself in this business as I was maturing, but I was still trying to shed. And so I didn't get out of all of that debt-wise until my 40s, early 40s, only by the blessing of the business actually working and hitting that cash flow curve. So most of my investment in my 30s was in a business. So it's not like it's a 401k that you can eat. It was in the business and betting on myself, and it just, worked. And I had a lot of guilt about that because at that point, I'm sure later in FI, I'm sure people that at least that are married have this. Shauna didn't know most of this because we didn't talk about money. And I had all the guilt and shame of all of this debt and literally, okay, how are we paying the mortgage this month and covering it? Because I didn't want to disrupt her lifestyle. And we didn't have those conversations because I never grew up with parents and knew how those conversations were modeled. And so I had all of that overlay. So if you're married and you're trying to catch up, you have this whole other emotional thing going on if there's some bad communication or dysfunctional communication where there's a double guilt and stress related to it. As a result, for us, it almost blew up our marriage because I was horrible, because I was internalizing all of it and being passive aggressive, and I was a horrible husband for a period of time related to that because I had so much guilt and stress going on. So yeah, we all have our stories.
So in this podcast, they talk about a wake-up period, something that made you wake up and decide now's the time to move forward and really think about my financial future. It sounds like in your 40s was when you said, now I'm going to start, planning for retirement or at least thinking about it and potentially at some point get your wife on the same page. Can you tell us a little bit about how that came to be and what shifts you made to start thinking about retirement and getting your partner, more involved in that?
Yeah, well, it had to happen on the relation side. I had to be a partner with my wife, right? And that was where it had to start. Because otherwise if you don't fix that part first, you're not rowing together, right? That's what we had to fix. Usually those things get fixed because there's an inflection point where it better be fixed or it's going to fall apart, right? It's very beautiful if you can find people that will fix it before it gets to that point, right? And for us, it was part of it. It was a decision point of this is going to get fixed or this isn't working. And so we walked that journey, and I don't want to go into a lot of the specifics of it. And I'm proud that we did, but that's the first thing, is get that relational part fixed. And one of the easiest ways to do that is you have to get outside your bubble and start having conversations. Usually it's better to do it outside the house or even driving so you're not facing each other. And I think when you're getting into that decision, you start thinking about retirement. I think it's the worst thing to do is think about retirement. It's probably too big of a goal.
So were there goals that you set then that made you get on the same page? And maybe describe what some of those goals would be?
So the first goal was to right-size our lifestyle, right? So we moved from this house I talked about, this house that we shouldn't have bought that was my ego house along with the car. We sold that house. We moved to a similar size house that cost half as much near her parents and her family. So we got our family unit together and we shed a lot of the things that we thought we valued, meaning the really nice house and everything else. And we got to a much lower cost of living around family. And that's how our kids grew up, which did two things. One is it cut the cost by our lifestyle cost significantly, but it also put us around family and friends. Literally, we lived in the same street as my wife's sister and her husband and her kids. So they were all just running around the neighborhood together. So that was the first step, is to shed a lot of the mistakes. The BMW went away. I got a Grand Cherokee. So we did the frugaling, and she went back to work as part of that, which helped on the financial end. So we really got our stuff together there. And then it was, okay, now that we have the frugaling done, how do we start building income? Retirement, I don't think is something, if you're late, I wouldn't worry about thinking about retirement. I would worry about changing the trajectory of things.
Yeah. And on the podcast, Bill and Becky talk a lot about addressing the big rocks. So it sounds like that's exactly what you did. And was there a specific reason for saying, hey, we need to downsize, we need to get rid of the BMW, we need to make this major life change? Or was it just like, this just makes sense? Or what was it that caused you to address those big rocks that are, for most people, very hard to change, especially later in life?
they seem harder than they are. They're harder to make. I mean, it's easy to make them, they're easy. And for us, it was literally a moment on the couch of, what the hell are we doing? Why are we running so hard? Why are we doing this? And it was really not much more than that. And then we moved within like 6 months.
And did you find your happiness factor changed at all after you kind of eliminated certain things that maybe you thought were going to bring you happiness, or maybe they did bring you happiness?
Oh, totally. It was funny when we bought the house in Mansfield, where that was the same size house that was half the cost. I was struggling with it a little bit. I didn't even want to look at it. It was like a model home in a neighborhood that was like it was a spec house, actually, not a model house, a spec house. And I'm like, I don't care. I want to be there, but I don't really care about the house, and move there. I was still sort of whining about it. But once we got there, it's so much better. I moved my office from Dallas to Fort Worth, which is another part of that. Who you are around is part of this whole thing. I was in Dallas. Dallas is wonderful, but that's where the beautiful people live. You run at a different speed. Everybody's pulling you at a different speed of where you eat and what you drive and all of those things. I moved my office to Fort Worth, which has a different speed. It's a big, small town. And so some of that was changing, just the people you hang out with, because that's who you're going to be like. So the happiness actually totally went up.
Yeah, because I think there's a lot of people that fear making a big change, potentially downsizing, moving to a different location, or getting rid of that car that you always wanted, or some other aspect of your life that you're changing from a big financial perspective, and they fear that it's going to be a situation where they're going to be less happy. And it sounds like
not at all.
The
not
opposite
at all.
Was what happened.
And I remember the inflection point with marriage was as soon as I decided and worked through, I'm going to be happy with Shauna in my life. It's not Shauna that's going to make me happy. That's when I actually became a real man. Right. My happiness wasn't dependent on her doing things for me. I think it's the same thing. It's almost, that's a codependent relationship, right? But when you have things, my car doesn't make me happy. Your car doesn't make you happy. Your boat doesn't make
Becky's
you happy.
car might make
her
happy.
Becky's car does.
So we do have to watch out for that.
But
it's the car thing.
Well, I think it's understandable that we put our perception of happiness and things is because that's what the world tells us to do, right?
Well, I think for this audience, that's so important to hear, because I think a lot of people that start late, they are set in their ways and they fear making big changes. And in many ways, in order to move the needle, you need to make those big changes, especially if you haven't saved as much, or you feeling like you're behind, or you're in your 50s or getting closer to retirement. It's the big rocks that you need to move, right, Becky, in order to make this really work. So it's great to hear that.
Yeah, and it's more intimidating than it really is. It really is. I get it. Selling the big house that you shouldn't have bought in the first place in our instance. I mean, that's sort of an indictment of I made a bad decision, or I can't do this. And that's sort of a badge of failure if you frame it that way. So it's scary, and it's hard to want to do that emotionally. Having happiness and confidence, I think confidence is a good word, is going to come from seeing where you're at, like you two did, Becky, and being on your heels. Confidence and happiness is going to come from getting on your toes. And that's making decisions and being proactive into stop digging, start filling it in, and moving forward. That's actually where happiness and confidence is going to come from. So when you start to make these decisions, you get off of your heels and you get on your toes, and it starts to become a positive trajectory that you get excited about. That's one reason why I think you get happier, is because it doesn't matter how low you are and how difficult it feels. If you're taking action that is helping you move forward, even if it's in little baby steps, it changes everything. You get so much more confidence.
Stephen and I, before we moved to Colorado, we were big into sailing. There was 2 different times in our life when we owned a sailboat. And one of the things I learned early on when we learned how to sail is you cannot steer a boat that's not moving. If it's still, you can turn the wheel, but you're not going to change anything. Sometimes you just have to start. In fact, we had someone in our community that we have interviewed said that for late starters, most people focus on the late. We need to focus on the start, that you're a starter. And if we just start moving forward, then it's like compounding. It'll pick up momentum. And when we see a decision that we make that in the past we may have screwed this particular area of our life up, but now we're making better choices. And that gives you confidence. That gives you momentum to move forward with that. And I know that's what worked for us in our life. Was there anything besides those big rocks that you changed? Do you have any subtle things that worked well for you?
Once you do the frugaling, one is, I think what you're saying is true, because the person that's going to move forward is not the person that you've been, right? I think it's Nietzsche said, it's like a snake will die if they don't shed their skin. So part of this process is becoming a new version of yourself and leaning into who you want to be. The way you become who you want to be, and this is an Atomic Habits thing, a James Clear thing, is I'm somebody who, like, use me as an example. I have a target every day. I don't buy stuff. And I say, I don't need stuff. I have enough stuff. And foregoing those little things like the candy bar or the upgrades is someone who's much more responsible for money. So I think that's one way to do it. But I think once you get to figuring out this frugality stuff, I would argue that if you're late to FI or late on your retirement journey, you have to redefine what the game actually is. Because the way the game is defined is that you save, and build up enough financial capital so you can retire. And between your financial capital and your Social Security, you have enough to support yourself into your 90s. That's the way the game is structured. Those numbers are hard enough even if you start early. If you're late, it may be insurmountable if that's how you frame the game. So, and that can put a lot of pressure on you. And this is a big knock I have on the retirement planning profession, is that we're defined by those spreadsheets, and the spreadsheets aren't going to work, especially if you're late. And so it's not binary. So I think start to think about what can you do to earn income and have time freedom. There's a lot of in between retiring and working. And we have plenty of examples that we talk about and that you know, and of people that are earning income, maybe not what they were earning in their profession. Because bluntly, the way you're going to solve this beyond saving and right-sizing your lifestyle is just working longer. That's really going to be that's the biggest asset we all have, is the ability to earn an income. And if you're late in FI, that may be the biggest thing that you can focus on. And that can be scary and depressing because of how we traditionally define working. You know, we think of the travel, the corporate bureaucracy, and the meetings and everything else. There's a whole world out there that doesn't involve all of those things, where you can still have time freedom and earn an income. And on our show for the last 9 years, we do a lot of surveying with people of what retirement means to them. It's not the absence of work. It's time freedom. It's some agency and control over their schedule. And so if work is going to be the big thing, how can you do that and have time freedom? That's going to be really probably what the game is for a lot of people, depending on where you're at on your financial independence journey.
And that circles us back to where we started, of try to create your best life now and not just look at the end goal of where it is you're trying. I mean, that's important.
Yeah.
But you've got to live in the meantime. In fact, I know there's a lot of people that say they don't like the word retirement, and I kind of don't either, because of what it means, the connotation around the word retirement, which makes us think about you're going to work until you're 65 and then stop working and sit on the porch in a rocking chair. And that's not at all what anybody that I know does.
Well, I agree with that. I don't like the word retirement.
Yeah.
The only reason I use it is because that's the word that everybody else uses.
Right.
One aspect you're asking, what subtle thing can you do, is if you're late to FI, or financial independence, or retirement planning, or whatever you want to call it, you're normal. You're really normal. And
that is true.
But we don't talk about these things. I mean, it's actually, and I found this in the Rock Retirement Club or in shows like yours, it's easier to talk about it with people that aren't your neighbor because it's a little bit too intimate. You're going to see them every day. And I think community and finding a cohort of people, and you can just find one person that's willing to walk that, because the more you realize that this isn't a problem that's necessarily unique to you. We're all struggling with some level of these problems. That is a huge step of not being alone in the room and beating yourself up too much and realizing, hey, we're all actually broken in this way in some form. And there's a lot of people around, and there's a power in that. I've definitely seen it in the club and other communities and the FI community.
For sure. And that's the further, I mean, even though Stephen and I are already retired, the further we go down this road, I mean, we're still learning. We're still evolving. And a lot of that comes from the people that we hang out with. You know, we changed a big portion of our circle of friends when we retired because we moved to a different state. But now our friends are they're not necessarily our neighbors, you know, because of Zoom and what we can do now. We have friends in the FI community that are everywhere. And they keep us energized. They keep us encouraged. We learn from them. Hopefully they learn maybe something from us. So
that's that second mountain too. That's that community, right? Yeah. Of your people that are walking with you. I'm sure you do this, right, Becky? And it's like when you beat yourself up, I should have spent that money on it. And you start beating yourself up. They pick you up and sort of poke you a little bit when you need it, but then they encourage you and they work as an exemplar of, oh, wow, they're doing it and they're not that different than me. So maybe I can do that too.
Absolutely. And that's the message that we want to get to our community is you can do this. And we're interspersing some details about the how-tos with your money with the stories, because there are so many stories in this community, and someone who is beating themselves up and feeling bad about the decisions they've made and where they are, they can hear the story that they resonate with, that they connect with, and go, wow, that person did it. Maybe it's not too late for me.
We did a retirement plan live series a couple years ago with someone who was and is living a really amazing life, and they don't spend a lot of money, which is unusual for people that listen to at least our show, I guess. I got a lot of flack for that. It's like, oh, that can't be true. That's not right. You can have a great life even if you're really late and you've made a lot of errors and you're trying to clean it up. It doesn't have to define who you are. It doesn't. And money is not going to be the thing that is going to define your life. It's just a matter of how creative and intentional you can be as you work your way through it. And I think that's something we need to hear, and we have plenty of examples of it that aren't celebrated enough because everything is a postcard and, Instagram and social media posing. There are plenty of people having amazing lives that did a lot of things wrong and feel like they're behind the eight ball, but it doesn't have to make their life a failure. And I think we need to know that and see examples of that because it's true. It's
absolutely. True. I love that. I love that. And you mentioned the retirement plan live. So tell us what that means. What is that?
Yeah, well, once a year, and we probably should do it more. We take volunteers from the podcast audience, and we anonymize them. They come on the show, and we have conversations, and we walk through where they're at, what they aspire to, where they're at. And talk through whether it's feasible or not, and if it's not feasible, what can they do to begin the journey of making it feasible? The most recent one we had where they had I don't even know if it was feasible at the beginning. They retired, a bear market hit, and it actually turned out to be not very feasible at all. They were in a bind, and so we use that as an example of, okay, well, let's talk through what do you do next? How do you start to manage and get back on track? And so we do those with just individuals people I don't know, and we just find them from the audience and share it on the show.
And then you do that in a certain month of the year?
Usually it's January, yeah. Yeah, usually it's January. We should do more of them.
And I have not gone back and listened to all of them, but it appears that you've had people with a lot of money, not so much money, that live in high cost of living area.
Single people, single people that got laid off unexpectedly from COVID. So we hit different profiles of situations and have real conversations with them on the show. So we can see that other people are walking this journey, and together we can figure out how do you navigate all of this stuff.
And you also go through the process of how to kind of figure out a plan and move forward and so forth. Is that correct?
Yeah, and a lot of it is, when it comes to money decisions, and it doesn't matter whether you're late to FI or not, it gets really confusing really quickly, and it's easy to focus on the wrong things. Right? So a lot of this comes down to having an organized way of thinking through it. You remember Wizard of Oz, Dorothy? She didn't start on the yellow brick road like a mile in. She had to go to the first brick and start her journey from the beginning in a particular order. There's a reason for that, because that's the process. You may want to fix paying off the debt first, but that might not be the first place to start. The first place to start is thinking through it in an organized way, which will lead you to a better decision of what actually there is to do. And so a lot of what we try to do on the show, and definitely in the Retirement Plan Live series, is what is the framework that I should think through this problem so I can get to a better decision for myself? Because every decision is going to be right for you, right? Or different for you. And there is no 5 steps to success. There is no, yes, you should always do your Roth contribution. No, it's going to be specific to your situation. That's why you have to think through it in an organized way.
I'm so glad that you said that, because it makes me think about the fact that I know the emotions that Stephen and I felt when we realized where we were and how bad it was, is because then you feel panicked. And you're like, I have to do something right now. I have to do something big today because I'm running out of time. And I know in my life, whenever I've done that, it's usually the wrong thing. I usually look back on that later and go, okay, I should have thought about that for 10 minutes, at least before I did it.
Yeah, well, if think of a person drowning. You're drowning and you just get your head up, you're barely getting your head above water, but the waves
Let's not talk about drowning while we're on a cruise, please.
I was at the mustard grill. I'm
let's
sorry.
Just say
I feel prepared.
Hypothetically.
Okay. I'm trying to think of another visual here. Okay. Well, they're not on a ship at the moment.
As he's blowing the foghorn.
Yeah. No.
It is quite foggy out there. We're looking out the windows.
But if you think about somebody that's in a panic, which is basically what you're talking about, right? You and Steve are in a panic. You're grabbing at anything, right? They a lot of times that's what they teach lifeguards, right? The person's going to try to bring you down because they're just grabbing for anything. And that's actually really dangerous, not just to the rescuer, but to you. And in the financial sense, it could be making rash decisions in order to pay off debt. Maybe it's liquidating your entire 401k, even though you're under 59 and a half, to pay off your debt, just because you want to do something big. And big is, it feels, you're grappling for agency. You're grappling for some power over the situation. And it could be, you're also susceptible to somebody selling you something really stupid that you don't need to be buying because they're selling the faux life preserver that you can latch onto to feel better in the moment, which actually is probably a disastrous long-term decision. So you got to be really careful and sort of check yourself in doing these rash decisions that will feel good in the moment. And it can be hard because it's not the big things that matter. The big things aren't that important. It's all the little things that you can do. Peter Attia's book, Outlive, is good at it. And I've been writing on this, just journaling on this a lot. It's about trajectories, right? Think of your financial independence like your health. A big decision might be, I'll never have pizza again and I'm only eating salad. Well, that's probably setting yourself up for failure, right? Because we're used to having pizza. It's about making little micro changes to these little decisions that slowly change the trajectory of your life. In health, it would be, not drinking alcohol or eating, not eating junk food, never going to McDonald's again or something. Those things over time change the entire trajectory. It's the same thing financially, right? Not buying too many books on Amazon, which actually you can't buy too many books in my decision. Maybe we should use a different. We're in the library at the moment,
surrounded by books.
Yeah. But it's these little things is where you have to start, because that big grasping to do something big is really you trying to get some agency and control, and we can just overshoot that to our detriment.
True. Now, sometimes some of the things we need to do probably are big, but we don't need to, as you say, grasp at them. We don't need to just do something so that we feel like we're making some kind of progress.
I do agree with doing something quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Just make it really small, right? Because I remember when we were going through the COVID bear market, we had a lot of phone calls, and we had a process that we used when we were talking to each person, which was, this is horrible. And then letting them talk about how it's horrible. And then affirming, hey, you're still going to have a great life. This is just something we need to navigate. But we always left with an action to go do something. And actually it was a really small action. I had clients that were cutting part of their cable bill. They had no need to do anything, but they have to have an action, because we all want to have action. We all want to have some agency in our life. So I do agree with doing something, but it can be really, really small. Doesn't have to be big, but not doing anything is probably the worst thing we can do. We always want to have that agency. What we're talking about is, what can I do next? What can I do next? Literally next. The way you quit smoking is get through the next 5 minutes. And then the next 5 minutes. And then the next 5 minutes. And pretty soon you're not a smoker. So if you're trying to get through coming out of a financial mess that you've made, or maybe it just got made for you out of life circumstance, what can I do today to just improve it just a little bit? That's all we got to focus on, because that's the only thing we can have control over, and it will allow us not to have to look at the mountain and feel too intimidated.
Roger, this has been an excellent conversation today. I've really enjoyed this, and I think that you've given our audience some real nuggets that they can think about and implement. And what I want to do now is, would you tell us a little bit about your vision for the podcast, your business? Can you tell us about the RRC, the Rock Retirement Club? Just tell us what you've got going on.
Yeah, so the podcast is, I want to build an ecosystem that's outside. Well, we're building an ecosystem that's outside of traditional retirement planning, where it's empowering people to take action, rather than let it be a transparent economic engine, rather than the way our industry is structured right now, which is essentially, like any industry, gather assets and distribute financial products, and then have some faux planning or, surface level planning that goes along with it. I think it's time to have an ecosystem that is all about learning how to do things and getting provided the tools to do it, and then having people around that you can walk with that are in the same season of life. In this case, it's retirement. It doesn't matter whether you're late to FI or not, that can have the same spirit to grow together and help each other, because that's really where the power is. To deal with being late to FI, the best way to learn that is, yes, have some financial structures around that, and I can definitely provide that. But it's going to be talking to all the people you're talking to, the people that are doing it right now and the people that have done it and are a little bit ahead of you on the trail. That's how you figured it out. I have no clue how to do that. I'm on my own journey. So it's hearing everybody else and learning and walking together. So we're building an ecosystem that provides world-class education that's not actually trying to sell you something. And that's hard to find. And then tools to be able to apply that education, and then awesome people to walk with, so we can all learn from each other as we're walking the same trail. That's what we're building.
And a whole bunch of friends to go on a cruise with.
And a whole bunch of friends to go along with it.
Absolutely. So, Roger, where can people find you?
Retirement Answer Man podcast or rogerwhitney.com. The best places to check it out.
Great. Well, thanks so much for being here with us. And we are having a great time here on the cruise, and we will be back with you next week.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thanks.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Catching Up to FI. We would appreciate it if you could leave a 5-star review so that our message can reach others.
We are not lawyers, financial advisors, accountants, or tax experts. Please consult your own professional advisors before making any important decisions. Our content is for entertainment and education purposes only.
We'll see you next time on Catching Up to FI.